Imagine this. It's 1878 in Fort Worth, Texas. The streets are dusty, the cattle drives never stop, and money from the railroad flows like whiskey on a Saturday night. But behind the swinging doors of one particular saloon, the Copper Bell, something far darker than poker games and bar fights is brewing. People walk in sick and broken, and walk out healed. Headaches gone, consumption cured, crippling pain vanished overnight. But on one bloody October night, 12 people left the Copper Bell in coffins. And the town, it's been trying to bury the truth ever since. This is the story of Dr. Cornelius Weatherby, the man who brought miracles to Fort Worth, and turned it into a living nightmare. Part 1. The Miracle on Main Street. Fort Worth in the fall of 1878 was a city split in two. On one side, you had cattlemen, ranch hands, and drifters, men with dirt on their boots and revolvers at their hips. On the other, shiny-booted investors from the east, hungry to turn the frontier into their personal gold mine. It was a city caught between civilization and chaos, where secrets didn't just hide in shadows, they thrived there. When Dr. Cornelius Weatherby stepped off the train from Dallas in the spring of 1877, nobody knew what to make of him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. His black frock coat was spotless, his hands steady, except for a faint tremor he blamed on war injuries. No one asked too many questions. Not in Fort Worth. The locals only knew this. Weatherby had been a Union Army surgeon during the war, patching up soldiers on bloody battlefields far to the east. His letters of recommendation from military hospitals were impressive, and in a town where a toothache could turn deadly, that was enough to make him a welcome sight. But Weatherby didn't open a typical doctor's office. Instead, he bought a 2-story building on Main Street, across from the First National Bank. By summer, a shining copper bell hung above the door, catching the Texas sun, and a new sign swung in the breeze. The Copper Bell. Locals thought it was strange at first, a doctor running a saloon, but Weatherby had an explanation ready. Alcohol, he said with a calm, easy smile, is a medicine when used properly. And people heal faster in a friendly environment. And the people of Fort Worth believed him. The Copper Bell wasn't like the other rough and tumble saloons in town. Instead of sticky floors and drunken brawls, there was polished mahogany shipped in from New Orleans, brass lamps that glowed warm and soft, and thick carpets that muffled the sound of boots. It felt refined, almost elegant, a slice of the East in the middle of the Texas plains. But it was the back room that really set it apart. Behind a heavy oak door marked private consultation, Weatherby had built what looked like a state-of-the-art medical office. Shelves stacked high with glass bottles, powders, and liquids that shimmered like liquid gold under the light. A large desk covered in neatly written notes and medical journals from Europe. And an unsettling smell, sharp, chemical, and strange, that clung to anyone who stepped inside. "Smells like a hospital," one rancher muttered after a visit. "No," another replied, shaking his head. "Smells like something new." Weatherby's treatments weren't like anything Fort Worth had seen before. He didn't just hand out medicine and send you home. Every consultation happened right there in the saloon, under his watchful eye. He'd mix strange drinks in delicate glasses, sometimes amber like fine whiskey, sometimes a green so bright it almost glowed, and have patients drink them on the spot. And then, the miracles started. Martha Caldwell, a young widow suffering from headaches so intense she could barely stand, claimed one sip of Weatherby's neural tonic cured her pain completely. Samuel Hutchins, a tough-as-nails cattleman who could barely walk because of arthritis, strutted out of the Copper Bell that night like he was 20 years younger. Word spread fast. Soon, cowboys detoured off cattle trails just to see the miracle doctor. Railroad workers pooled their pay to afford his treatments. By late summer, the Copper Bell was packed every night, part saloon, part clinic, part spectacle. And people didn't just drink at the Copper Bell. They worshipped it. But not everyone was convinced. Dr. Marcus Gilliland, the town's longtime physician, started asking questions. What was in those drinks? How were the cures happening so fast? And then there were the whispers. stories of patients who didn't get better. Of men and women who disappeared after late-night visits to the consultation room. Of Weatherby himself, seen late at night in the alley behind the Copper Bell, his coat sleeves rolled up, carrying crates stamped with labels from laboratories in New York and Boston. The town ignored the rumors. Because as long as the miracles kept coming, nobody wanted to believe the truth. Then came the night of October 15, 1878. By morning, 12 people were dead. And the Copper Bell was soaked in blood. Would you like me to start drafting part 2, diving into the night of the massacre, with the same style? Imagine a town so desperate for hope. A town where sickness, pain, and heartbreak ruled every home, until one man promised a cure for it all. But in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1878, miracles came with a price. A terrible price. And while the Copper Bell rang each evening, calling people to salvation, no one realized that the sound was less a promise of healing, and more a warning. This is part 2 of Secrets of Copper Bell. Part 2: The Price of the Cure. By the summer of 1878, the Copper Bell wasn't just a saloon anymore, it was a phenomenon. Every evening, the bell rang clear across the streets of Fort Worth, and people came running. Cowboys fresh off the trail, exhausted railroad workers, widows worn down by grief, even wealthy folks from the other side of town. They all wanted the same thing, a taste of whatever drive. Cornelius Weatherby was mixing in those glasses behind the polished mahogany bar. And it wasn't just the desperate anymore. Even Fort Worth's most prominent citizens had become regulars. The wife of bank president Theodore Bancroft stopped by every Thursday, and Harrison Wade's mother, the matriarch of one of the richest cattle families in Texas, visited twice a week. They all left the same way. Eyes bright, faces glowing, laughing like they hadn't in years. And the more they drank, the more they wanted. Locals started calling it the Copper Bell effect. A man would walk in looking half dead, coughing his lungs out, shoulders heavy with pain and despair. An hour later, that same man would be leaning against the bar, laughing, tipping his hat to the serving girls, and talking about plans for the future like he'd just been given a second chance at life. It wasn't long before people stopped waiting to get sick before visiting Weatherby. Preventive care, they called it. By July, Main Street was chaos every night. Crowds spilled into the dusty road, shouting to get inside, waving their hats to catch the attention of Jonas Keffart, the experienced bartender Weatherby had hired to keep up with demand. Rebecca Howe and Eleanor Finch, two farm girls barely out of their teens, worked the floor every night, balancing trays of glasses while sneaking glances into the back room where Weatherby worked his strange magic. The Copper Bell was no longer just a saloon. It was the beating heart of Fort Worth. And no one, not even the mayor, dared question the man who made it all possible. But in the quiet corners of town, away from the glow of oil lamps and the cheer of the Copper Bell, people were starting to whisper. Dr. Marcus Gilliland, the town's long-serving physician, had begun to notice things. Strange things. Patients who swore by Weatherby's cures were coming to him, not for help, but for secrecy. Their hands shook when they talked. Their tempers flared at the smallest things. They couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything except their next visit to the Copper Bell. It's like laudanum, Gilliland muttered one evening as he poured himself a drink, but worse. He tried to warn people. Tried to tell them that what Weatherby was giving out wasn't just medicine. That it was changing people. But they wouldn't listen. The first death happened in August. Pete Garrison was a cattle driver, tough as they come, the kind of man who could ride for days through heat and dust without complaint. He'd been drinking one of Weatherby's pulmonary restoratives, a thick, bitter tonic that was supposed to clear his lungs after weeks on the trail. Witnesses said he stepped outside the Copper Bell, took 2 steps into the street, and collapsed. What happened next froze the crowd in place. Pete convulsed violently, his body twisting in ways that didn't seem human. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, foam poured from his mouth, and his back arched so far people swore they heard bones crack. By the time Drive, Gilliland pushed through the crowd, Pete was gone. Dead. Weatherby came out minutes later, calm as ever, holding a piece of paper in his steady, gloved hand. Pre-existing heart condition, he said, his voice flat, almost bored. The treatment wasn't to blame. The constable nodded and wrote it down, but those who'd been there swore Pete had looked fine just moments before. Healthy, even. What chilled them most wasn't Pete's violent death. It was the way Weatherby didn't flinch. Didn't grieve. Didn't even look surprised. Instead, he knelt beside the body with a small notebook and began taking notes. 2 weeks later, the second death came. And this time, no one could explain it away. Martha Caldwell, the quiet seamstress who had been one of Weatherby's earliest success stories, had missed her last 2 treatments. Neighbors heard her screaming through the thin walls of her little house all night. "They're under my skin," she cried, over and over again. "Please, someone get them out, they're eating me alive." By morning, the screaming had stopped. When the sheriff kicked open her door, the sight inside made even the most hardened men turn pale. Martha was sprawled across the floor, her arms and face torn open by deep scratches, her fingernails bloody down to the quick. Her wide, frozen eyes still stared at the ceiling, locked in terror. The official report called it nervous exhaustion. But Gilliland knew better. She didn't die of exhaustion, he whispered, standing over her still body. She died fighting something none of us can see. For the first time, cracks appeared in Weatherby's perfect reputation. But every time doubt began to spread, the miracles returned. People still walked into the Copper Bell sick and came out whole. Families still praised Weatherby for saving their loved ones. And businesses downtown, hotels, restaurants, shops, were making more money than ever from the visitors pouring in. The mayor refused to allow an investigation. After all, his own wife swore that Weatherby's tonic was the only thing that had ever let her sleep through the night. And so, the bell kept ringing, calling more people in, and locking Fort Worth tighter and tighter in the grip of the Copper Bell. Would you like me to write part 3, when Weatherby's experiments start showing their true, horrifying purpose? They called it the night the Copper Bell went mad. By sunrise, 12 people would lie dead on the floor of Fort Worth's most beloved saloon, their faces twisted in terror, and not a soul in town would ever speak of it openly again. But before the screaming started, before the blood and chaos, it began like any other October night, warm, humid, and heavy with the promise of a storm. Part 3, The Copper Bell, October 1878. Autumn had deepened in Fort Worth, but the heat still clung to the streets, thick and stifling. The cattle driving season was slowing down, and with it, the mood at the Copper Bell grew tense. Dr. Horace Weatherby, the quiet, pale-eyed doctor who had somehow turned the Copper Bell into both a saloon and a clinic, was restless. The regulars, those who had once praised his miracle cures, now whispered that they needed more of his strange tonics to feel the same relief. Stronger doses, new mixtures, and Weatherby delivered. Crates began arriving almost daily, some marked medical supplies and laboratory equipment, shipped from far-off cities like Chicago and New York. Sometimes the labels bore foreign names no one in Fort Worth could pronounce. Jonas Keffart, the Copper Bell's trusted bartender, said the doctor handled these crates like they were nitroglycerin, never letting anyone else touch them. Greater than, leave them be, Weatherby snapped once, when Keffart offered to help. Too delicate, he hissed. Too important. By October 15th, the doctor's restlessness had turned into something sharper, an excitement that unnerved everyone who worked there. The evening began like any other. The oil lamps cast their warm glow across the polished bar. Shadows danced on the walls as the first customers trickled in, laughing, sweating, brushing trail dust from their coats. But outside, the prairie sky was turning black. Massive storm clouds rolled in from the west, the kind that made the streets vanish under sudden rivers of mud and shook buildings down to their frames. Rebecca Howe, one of the serving girls, noticed Weatherby pacing, muttering under his breath, Latin words mixed with English fragments that made no sense. Eleanor Finch, her friend, swore his hands were trembling as he lined up strange glass instruments on the bar, the kind no one had ever seen before. By 6 o'clock, the place was packed, and not just with the usual cowhands and curious locals. Tonight, the Copper Bell had drawn Fort Worth's elite. Cattle Baron Harrison Wade sat near the window, a man whose wife swore Weatherby had cured her migraines. Mayor William Crawford and railroad executive Thomas Benedict shared a table in the corner, nodding politely as they sipped their whiskey. Even Drive, Marcus Gilliland, Weatherby's only real rival, had shown up, claiming scientific curiosity. Word had spread across North Texas. Weatherby was unveiling a new formula. One that wouldn't just numb pain or calm nerves, but cure illness forever. By 7, the saloon was standing room only. Rain pounded the windows. Thunder cracked like rifle shots over the prairie. And behind the bar, Drive, Weatherby smiled. Tonight, he said, his pale eyes flashing as lightning lit up the room, you will witness the future of medicine. A cure not just for pain, but for everything. There was a murmur of awe. No one noticed the way his voice shook. No one noticed the way his hands trembled as he reached for the crates. This time, he wasn't using his usual brown bottles of amber and green liquid. From the crates came crystalline powders, glittering like crushed diamonds, and strange shimmering compounds that seemed to change color when the lamplight hit them, blue one second, green the next, and then something oily and iridescent that hurt to look at for too long. When Weatherby poured the powder into his mixing glass, it hissed and released a sharp, chemical vapor that burned the nose. Some people instinctively stepped back. Greater than, don't be afraid, Weatherby said, smiling too wide. This is progress. By 8, every glass was filled with the strange new drink. It didn't look like the familiar tinctures the regulars had grown used to. This stuff was different. The liquid was thick, with an oily, swirling blue-green tint, and the smell, sharp, chemical, with a sickly sweet undercurrent, made more than one customer wrinkle their nose. Some hesitated, but no one wanted to be the coward in front of Mayor Crawford, or the cattle barons, or the doctor himself. Weatherby raised his glass. To health, he said. And 60 voices echoed him. The effects were immediate. At first, it seemed harmless, even funny. Some patrons burst out laughing at nothing, unable to stop. Others became transfixed by the simplest things. The grain of the tables, the way their hands moved when they waved them slowly in front of their faces. Then it got darker. Mayor Crawford started talking too fast, ranting about railroads and future plans for Fort Worth, words tumbling from his mouth in a feverish blur. His eyes, glassy and far away, didn't seem to recognize anyone anymore. Harrison Wade, the cattle baron, slammed his glass down and accused the men beside him of plotting to steal his ranch. His voice grew louder, more furious, until he was shouting at strangers, his face red and slick with sweat. Samuel Hutchins, the arthritic cattleman who swore Weatherby had healed him, let out a guttural scream and began clawing at his own arms, raking bloody lines across his skin. Greater than, they're under my skin. He shrieked. They're crawling through me. Rebecca Howe froze as Martha Ellsworth, the banker's widow, who had praised Weatherby for curing her consumption, began to scream, convinced the walls were closing in on her. She hurled herself against the windows, again and again, her voice breaking as thunder boomed overhead. By now, the Copper Bell was pure chaos. Glass shattered, tables overturned. The storm outside howled like some angry god, lightning bathing the room in blinding flashes of white. And behind the bar, Drive, Weatherby just watched, his pale eyes wide, his trembling hands gripping the edge of the counter. Dr. Gilliland, who'd barely sipped the concoction, tried to help, shouting for calm, trying to pull people back from their frenzy. But even he swayed, blinking rapidly, his speech slurring. Whatever Weatherby had brewed was working its way through his veins too. The night the Copper Bell went mad had only just begun. Would you like me to prepare part 4 in the same tone, starting immediately after this chaos erupts? Part 4: The Night of No Return. Hook. Some nights are remembered only in whispers, and some are never spoken of again. October 15, 1878, in Fort Worth, Texas, was one of those nights, the night the Copper Bell stopped being just a saloon and became the stage for something dark, something unholy, that no one could explain. Dash dash dash. The storm raged outside as the copper bell descended into chaos. Lightning tore through the sky, flashing against the tall windows like the angry eyes of God, but inside, the screams drowned out even the thunder. Dr. Weatherby stood behind the bar, his pale eyes glowing in the lamplight. His trembling hands gripped the edge of the counter as if holding the earth itself together. To the few survivors who would later talk, only in hushed voices, he looked less like a healer that night and more like a prophet staring into the gates of hell. Rebecca Howe, the young serving girl, would later tell investigators, "It was like the world went sideways. Folks I'd known my whole life, they weren't themselves no more. At first, it was madness, wild laughter, nonsensical rambling, shouts of paranoia. But then, the true horror began. Dash dash dash. The first death. Samuel Hutchins, the arthritic cattleman once healed by Weatherby's earlier treatments, screamed that bugs were crawling beneath his skin. His nails tore long, ragged trails across his arms as he clawed at himself, screaming for help no one could give. Then, with a final howl that made even hardened cowboys flinch, he collapsed in a heap, his body convulsing until it went eerily still. When his eyes opened again, they were empty, a glassy, unnatural white. And then, he smiled. Witnesses swore Samuel stood back up, slow and shaky, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched. Dash dash dash. The descent. By then, the room was a nightmare. People clawed at each other, their minds twisted by Weatherby's glowing blue-green formula. One man smashed his glass into the table, carving bloody lines into his arms like he was trying to let the poison out. A well-dressed banker pounded his head against a wall until the plaster cracked. Martha Ellsworth, the widow who believed Weatherby had saved her life, tried to escape through a window. When it wouldn't open, she hurled herself at the glass, shattering it with a sickening crash. Witnesses said she screamed as the jagged edges ripped through her arms, but she didn't stop. She ran, barefoot, into the storm, and was never seen alive again. Dash dash dash. Weatherby's madness. Dr. Weatherby's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, shouting in Latin mixed with frantic English. "It's working," he screamed over the storm. "Don't you see? Sympathetic resonance, perfect synchronization." But no one saw brilliance. They saw insanity. Jonas Keffart, the Copper Bells bartender, tried to stop him, lunging over the bar to grab the doctor by his coat. Witnesses said Weatherby turned on him with an expression that froze the blood. He didn't look human anymore, Keffart would say years later, drunk and shaking. His eyes, Lord help me, his eyes were glowing. Dash dash dash. The storm breaks. Outside, the storm reached its peak, wind howling like a chorus of the damned. Inside, the Copper Bell became a slaughterhouse. Mayor Crawford, raving about conspiracies and golden futures, picked up a chair and swung it blindly. The blow connected with another man's skull, dropping him instantly. The mayor didn't stop swinging until 3 men were lying motionless at his feet, their blood pooling into the cracks between the floorboards. Rebecca Howe hid beneath a table, clutching her apron to her mouth to keep from screaming as the nightmare unfolded around her. She saw Dr. Gilliland, Weatherby's skeptical rival, trying desperately to organize a line of terrified patrons, urging them toward the back door. "Stay calm," Gilliland shouted. "We'll get you out." But they didn't make it. The swinging doors burst open, slamming against the walls with the force of the wind, and a figure stumbled in, soaked, trembling, and barely recognizable. It was Martha Ellsworth, the widow. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her eyes were wide, wild, and full of something inhuman. She staggered forward, her movements stiff and jerky, before collapsing in the center of the room. For a moment, silence. Then her body arched unnaturally, her back bending until it seemed her spine would snap. A guttural, animalistic howl tore from her throat, echoing through the saloon and drowning out the storm. And then the screaming began again. Dash dash dash. The survivors, flight. The Copper Bell's front windows shattered under the force of the wind, sending glass and rain spraying through the room. Lightning illuminated faces, twisted, bleeding, unrecognizable. Rebecca, Jonas, and a handful of others made a desperate dash for the back door, tripping over overturned chairs and fallen bodies. The last thing Rebecca saw before she fled was Dr. Weatherby, standing in the center of the carnage, arms raised like a preacher in the pulpit, shouting words that made no sense but somehow felt older than the town itself. The morning after. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving Fort Worth eerily silent. Sheriff Tom Abernathy and his deputies arrived to find the Copper Bell doors swinging open, the muddy streets around it littered with broken glass and abandoned horses. Inside, they found 12 bodies. Some were arranged almost carefully, lined up like offerings. Others were twisted, broken, unrecognizable. The air reeked of rotten chemical fumes, and the floor was slick with something black and oily that no one could quite identify. Of Dr. Weatherby, there was no sign. Only shattered glass, spilled chemicals, and a set of muddy footprints leading out the back door, straight into the Trinity River, where they vanished. Fort Worth buried its dead quietly, without speeches or sermons. Families were paid to stay silent. The Copper Bell closed its doors, never to reopen, its windows boarded up like the town wanted to erase what had happened there. But the survivors, they could never forget. Rebecca Howe left town a week later and never returned. Jonas Kephart drank himself to death before the year was out, his final words muttering about eyes in the dark. And those who lived long enough to tell the story always said the same thing. Whatever drive Weatherby unleashed that night, it wasn't from this world. Would you like me to make part 5 even darker, maybe diving into what happened to Weatherby after that night? Part 5: The Vanishing Doctor. Hook. They thought the Copper Bell tragedy ended with the storm. But evil like that, it never really ends. Dr. Silas Weatherby didn't vanish that night, not completely. And for the next 7 years, the whispers of his return would haunt Fort Worth like a sickness no prayer could cure. The official records said Weatherby drowned. The muddy footprints led straight into the Trinity River, and the swollen current of that storm-swollen night was more than enough to carry a man away. But not everyone believed that story. Old Jonas Kephart, before whiskey claimed what was left of his sanity, swore he saw Weatherby, pale and dripping, standing at the edge of the cemetery 2 nights after the storm. He wasn't, right, Jonas told anyone who'd listen. His skin, it wasn't skin no more. Like it had been washed clean off and something else was wearing it, something that smiled when it saw me. Most folks dismissed him, but then, the disappearances started. The river takes. It began with animals. A milk cow dragged from a pasture, its bones found days later by the riverbank, polished clean. Dogs vanished from porches. Chickens stopped roosting and scattered into the woods, never to be seen again. Then it was people. A trapper named Elijah Boone went missing first. His canoe was found drifting downstream, empty, with strange claw marks gouged deep into the wood. Next was Mary Lou Wallace, a schoolteacher who never came home from evening prayers. They found her Bible in the reeds by the river, the pages shredded like paper in a storm. Each time, there were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, only the silence of the river, and the faint, sickly glow of blue-green light flickering beneath the water's surface. The widow's return. Rebecca Howe, the only surviving woman from that night, had fled Fort Worth, swearing she'd never set foot in Texas again. But grief has a way of drawing people home. In the spring of 1880, her sister fell ill, some said cursed, and Rebecca returned. She didn't stay in town, choosing instead a small shack on the outskirts, close enough to see the Copper Bell's boarded windows in the distance. Neighbors claimed she burned candles through the night and muttered prayers in a language they didn't recognize. She wasn't the same girl, Mrs. Whitaker, a neighbor, recalled. Her eyes, they'd seen something that never let go. She kept saying the doctor was coming back. Said the river carried him away, but it didn't keep him. Voices in the dark. Sheriff Abernathy tried to keep order, but even he couldn't deny the fear settling over Fort Worth like a plague. Children spoke of a tall, thin man wandering near the old rail bridge at night, humming a strange, low tune. Travelers reported finding strange symbols carved into trees along the riverbank, Circles with intersecting lines, glowing faintly when the moonlight hit just right. And then there were the dreams. Dozens of townsfolk, from hardened ranchers to church-going mothers, claimed they woke in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, hearing Weatherby's voice whispering promises of salvation, and something darker. He told me, confessed Pastor Gideon Phelps, trembling before his congregation, that the storm wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. He said the river speaks now, and it calls his name. The night of the lanterns. By the summer of 1881, fear had turned to anger. A group of men, led by Deputy Clay Mercer, decided to hunt Weatherby, dead or alive. Armed with lanterns, rifles, and rope, they followed the river south, guided by the strange green glow that flickered just below the surface. They never came back. 3 days later, a single lantern washed up near the docks. Its glass was cracked, its metal twisted like it had been gripped by something impossibly strong. The river carried no other trace of the men, no hats, no boots, no rifles. Nothing. After that, no one went near the water after dark. The Copper Bell opens. In the winter of 1883, something impossible happened. The Copper Bell, boarded and abandoned since that cursed night, stood open. Its doors hung wide as if welcoming someone, or something, home. Inside, candles burned in neat rows, their wax pooling on the floorboards. And on the far wall, written in what some swore was blood, was a single word. Home. Sheriff Abernathy ordered the building sealed and guarded, but by the next morning, the candles were gone, the word scrubbed clean, and the deputy posted outside had vanished without a sound. The final sightings. By 1885, the town was a ghost of itself. Families moved away, businesses closed, and those who stayed did so only because they were too poor, or too afraid, to leave. That's when the sightings grew bolder. Hunters swore they saw Weatherby, standing waist-deep in the river, his skin pale and stretched thin, his eyes glowing with that unnatural blue-green light. One hunter, Thomas Keene, fired at the figure. The bullet hit. He swore it hit. But the thing in the water didn't flinch. It only smiled, raised a hand in silent greeting, and slipped beneath the current without a ripple. Keene left town the next morning. He never returned. The flood of 85. On August 3, 1885, the Trinity River flooded after weeks of heavy rain. It swept through Fort Worth like the wrath of God, tearing homes from their foundations and drowning entire streets. When the water receded, the town was nearly gone, washed clean, as if the land itself wanted to erase what had happened there. Only one structure remained standing, untouched by the floodwaters, the Copper Bell. Its doors still open, its floors bone dry. Inside, on the bar, was a single black bottle. Uncorked, half empty, and beside it, a note written in Weatherby's spidery hand. Greater than, the river is awake. The work continues. The silence after. After the flood, Fort Worth rebuilt, but not on the riverbank. The old district was abandoned, left to rot. The Copper Bell stood there for decades, a silent sentinel, until it finally collapsed in a storm sometime around 1912. But even then, there were whispers. Fishermen spoke of strange lights beneath the water on moonless nights. Travelers claimed to hear voices carried on the current, calling them by name. And every now and then, someone would vanish, leaving only footprints leading down to the water's edge, and stopping. Closing line. And so the river kept its secrets, deep, dark, and waiting. Because some men, some monsters, are never truly gone. Would you like Part 6 to reveal Weatherby's final fate, or keep him as an eternal, unsolved horror? Part 6: The Echoes of the Bell. Hook. Time erases most things, scars fade, buildings crumble, names are forgotten. But some places never let go. By 1891, Fort Worth had rebuilt itself miles upriver, leaving the ruins of the Copper Bell and the old riverbank to the wilderness. But silence does not mean safety. Silence is just waiting. The children by the river. The first sign came in the spring. 3 children, siblings, ages 5 to 11, wandered down to the old river path to gather wildflowers. Their mother swore she was watching them from the porch, just for a moment, before a pot boiled over and drew her inside. When she returned, the yard was empty. Search parties scoured the woods for 2 days, finding only the youngest girl, Ruthie, sitting barefoot at the edge of the Trinity. Her hair was wet, her nightgown clinging to her small frame, her skin pale as bone. When the sheriff asked her where her brothers had gone, Ruthie only whispered. Greater than, the doctor said they were sick. He said he could fix them. She never spoke again. The stranger at the depot. By the summer of that year, the railroad brought strangers, prospectors, drifters, merchants. Most passed through without noticing the way folks avoided the river after sundown. But then came the stranger. Tall, gaunt, dressed in a black duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He arrived on the evening train and took a room at the boarding house without a word. The landlady, Mrs. Greaves, said she never saw him eat or drink. At night, townsfolk whispered of the glow of a single lantern moving steadily down the abandoned road toward the ruins of the Copper Bell. One boy swore he followed him once, just far enough to see the man stop at the edge of the river. The stranger knelt, placed something small and metallic into the water, and whispered in a voice that carried across the current. Greater than, I'm listening. By dawn, the boy was gone. His cap washed up on the bank 2 days later. The sheriff's warning. Sheriff Abernathy, older now, slower, with whiskey dulling the sharpness of his mind, gathered what few men still remembered that night in 78. You boys don't understand, he told them, voice shaking. This ain't some story to scare children. He's still out there, Silas Weatherby, or what's left of him. And every time someone wanders too close, the river takes its toll. When pressed, he wouldn't say more. Wouldn't explain why the old church bell, the one that used to ring out warnings during floods, had been ripped down and buried years ago. Some said Abernathy knew something the rest of them didn't. Something that kept him awake at night, staring toward the water until the sun came up. The lantern glow. Autumn brought storms, hard and fast, rolling in like punishment. One night, lightning split the sky, revealing a sight no one in town forgot. A line of lanterns, dozens, maybe hundreds, floating down the river in perfect silence, each one glowing with that unnatural, sickly green light. The preacher, Pastor Hollis, rang the church bell, summoning the town to higher ground. By morning, the lanterns were gone. But the sound remained, a low, hollow tolling, like the copper bell itself was ringing somewhere beneath the surface of the water. Rebecca's return. Rebecca Howe returned again that winter, traveling alone in a covered wagon. She looked older, worn, her black dress frayed at the hem, her eyes sharp and feverish. Locals avoided her, whispering that she'd gone mad, talking to shadows when she thought no one was watching. But there were others who listened. The desperate, the grieving, the ones who'd lost children, brothers, husbands to the river. Rebecca told them the truth. Greater than, he's building something. Beneath the water. The doctor promised salvation, but the river doesn't heal. It hungers. And it always will. The hollow sound. By 1893, the sound of the bell had grown louder. Not just in storms, but on still, quiet nights when the wind died and the moon hung low over the trees. People claimed to hear voices in that ringing. Some heard the names of the missing. Others swore they heard their own names, whispered soft as a prayer, pulling them toward the riverbank. Then came the dreams. Dreams of walking into the water, of cold hands pulling them gently under, of standing in the dark alongside Drive Weatherby as he smiled and said, not yet. But soon. The fire. The town tried to destroy what they couldn't understand. One summer night, a group of men rowed across the shallows, doused the ruins of the Copper Bell in kerosene, and set it alight. For a moment, it seemed to work. The old saloon crackled and burned, sparks rising into the starless sky. Then came the scream. Not human, not animal. A sound that split the night, froze blood in veins, and left every man on that river shaking. By dawn, the fire had vanished. The building stood whole again. Not a single scorch mark on the wood. And the men who had lit the blaze. They were never seen again. Dash dash dash. Rebecca's warning. That fall, Rebecca left another warning, carved into the side of the boarding house with a rusted knife before disappearing into the woods for good. The words were simple, desperate. Greater than, when the bell rings, run. No one understood. Not yet. Dash dash dash. The Winter of Bones. By 1895, the ground along the old river road had begun to change. Farmers plowing fields found bones, not animal, but human, buried shallow and brittle, some cracked clean through as if broken by immense force. One skull, unearthed by a plow blade, bore neat surgical cuts across the crown, the kind only a trained physician could make. Sheriff Abernathy resigned that spring, leaving a note tacked to the door of his office. Greater than, the river is patient. I won't wait to hear the bell again. Dash dash dash. Closing line. And so the river waited, quiet and still, holding its breath. Because the work of Dr. Silas Weatherby was far from finished. Dash dash dash. Would you like part 7 to focus on the first full confrontation with Weatherby, or should we build more tension with new disappearances and strange events? Part 7 When the Bell Tolls. Hook. By the winter of 1896, the river had taken more than it had ever given. Livestock, timber, children. But when the bell tolled that year, clear as church chimes in the dead of night, Fort Worth would understand that the hunger beneath the water had only just begun. Dash dash dash. The first toll. The sound came just past midnight. Every dog in town began to howl, their cries sharp and frantic, echoing down the dirt streets like a chorus of fear. Then came the bell. Not the small, tinny clang of the church tower. This was deeper, older, as though the ground itself had learned to ring. It rolled through the town in long, hollow notes that settled into the bones of anyone awake to hear it. Children woke screaming, lamps flared to life in windows. And at the edge of the river, lantern light flickered like distant stars. Dash dash dash. The disappearance of Pastor Hollis. By dawn, Pastor Hollis was gone. The last person to see him alive was a farmhand named Etta May, who'd been walking home when she saw him kneeling by the water, his Bible pressed to his chest, lips moving in desperate prayer. When she called to him, he turned slowly, eyes wide and vacant, before wading knee-deep into the current and vanishing without a splash. On the riverbank, they found only his Bible, its pages wet but unmarked, except for one word scrawled in black ink across the front. Greater than, soon. Dash dash dash. Rebecca's return. Rebecca Howe returned that morning, her horse slick with sweat, her face pale and drawn. She rode straight into the center of town, dismounted, and screamed for everyone to gather. Greater than, you heard it, didn't you? You heard the bell. Some tried to quiet her, to keep the panic contained. Others whispered that she'd gone mad, just another voice lost to the fever of that cursed river. But when Rebecca raised her hand, people saw the deep red burns across her palm, burns shaped like the curve of a bell. Greater than, he's calling them, she said, voice trembling. Calling all of us. Dash dash dash. The stranger speaks. The stranger, the tall man in the black duster who never seemed to sleep, stepped out of the shadows that night. He walked to the center of town, his boots heavy on the boards, and looked each person in the eye before finally speaking. His voice was dry, brittle, like paper crumbling in a fire. Greater than, you've fed him for 18 years, he said. And still you think you can starve the river. Someone shouted at him, demanding answers, but he ignored them. Instead, he tipped his hat low and began to hum a low, haunting tune. Rebecca froze. Greater than, that song, she whispered. He used to hum that. Silas. In the operating room. The stranger looked up, his face pale as the moon. Greater than, I am not Silas Weatherby, he said. But I carry what's left of him. And he's almost finished. Dash dash dash. The water rises. By early spring, the Trinity ran high and fast, churning with silt and the wreckage of trees torn from their roots. Strange things began washing up along the banks, pieces of wood carved with symbols no one recognized, shards of bone polished smooth as ivory, and glass jars filled with cloudy, stagnant water. One jar contained a strip of parchment, the ink smeared but legible enough to read. Greater than, to build eternity, the living must lay the foundation. The watchers. Children spoke of seeing figures at night, pale shapes standing along the tree line, their faces hidden in the dark. "They're waiting," Ruthie, now 13 and still silent most days, whispered one afternoon. She had not spoken in years, her voice brittle and thin like cracked porcelain. Rebecca knelt beside her, eyes wide. "Waiting for what, Ruthie?" The girl's mouth trembled before she finally said. "Greater than, for the door to open." The second toll. The second toll came on a night thick with heat. And silence. The town gathered in the square, clutching lanterns and rifles, the fear in their eyes sharp and brittle. Then, boom, the sound of the bell rolled through them again, louder this time, vibrating through the ground, rattling windows, shaking the nails loose from old wood. Across the river, the ruins of the copper bell glowed faintly green, like a lantern submerged in deep water. Rebecca turned to the crowd, her face pale and terrified. "Greater than, we can't fight him," she said. "We never could. But maybe we can bargain." The bargain. No one wanted to follow her, but they did. A group of 7 crossed the shallow edge of the river that night, Rebecca leading with a lantern held high. The stranger waited on the other side, his shadow long and thin against the glowing ruins. Rebecca stepped forward, voice trembling. "Greater than, what does he want? What will make him stop?" The stranger tilted his head, almost smiling. "Greater than, a town," he said softly. "A living town, one that will carry his name, speak his stories, feed him willingly." Rebecca shook her head, her voice sharp. "Greater than, and if we refuse?" The stranger's pale eyes glinted under the lantern light. "Greater than, then the river will take everything. Until nothing remains but the sound of the bell." The final warning. They left the ruins just before dawn, silent and shaken. By morning, the stranger was gone. Rebecca wrote in her journal that day, her handwriting sharp and furious. "Greater than, the copper bell is not a place. It is a promise, a covenant, and every toll brings us closer to the debt coming due." She folded the page, sealed it in an envelope, and pinned it to the church door. On the outside, in dark, bold ink, were 3 words. "Greater than, it is awake." Closing line. And that night, when the wind died and the town held its breath, the bell tolled once more, soft and slow, like a whisper carried on black water, promising that the river would not be denied. Would you like part 8 to show the town attempting the bargain, or should the next chapter dive into the origin of the bell and Silas Weatherby's experiments before the final build-up? Part 8: The Archivist's Ledger. Hook. The dead do not stay quiet in Fort Worth. By the spring of 1897, their whispers were as common as the tolling of the bell, carried through cracks in the floorboards, dripping from the ceilings, seeping up from the river like a sickness that had always been there. The ledger. Rebecca Howe found the ledger buried in the church cellar, wrapped in oiled cloth that smelled of iron and rot. The handwriting was unmistakable, Silas Weatherby. Its pages were stiff, yellowed with age, and every line was a confession, neat script detailing every operation, every failed experiment, every desperate attempt to bring the dead through the veil. The earliest entry, dated 1879, was written the night the copper bell opened its doors. "Greater than, the bell will be the signal. Not for the living, but for him. He has promised me dominion over the line between breath and silence. I will be his hand. I will open the door." Rebecca read by lantern light, her hands shaking, the shadows around her lengthening as though leaning in to listen. The first harvest. The ledger told of the first harvest, when 6 children vanished in the dead of night. Their bodies were never found. Silas wrote of the bell's instructions, how it demanded offerings, how it whispered in dreams, how its voice grew clearer with every life it claimed. Greater than, he is older than rivers, older than bone. The bell is his mouth, his hunger, his hymn. When it tolls, the ground bends to his will. Rebecca slammed the book shut, bile rising in her throat. Outside, the night was unnaturally still, the river glinting black under a sliver of moon. The stranger returns. At dawn, the stranger appeared again, on the steps of the old saloon, coat wet as though he'd waded through the river itself. Rebecca stormed toward him, clutching the ledger to her chest. Greater than, this is you, isn't it? She hissed. Silas. Or whatever's left of him. The stranger tilted his head, eyes pale and unblinking. Greater than, not Silas, he said softly. I told you that. But his memories, they linger. They want to be heard. Rebecca's voice trembled, though anger edged her words. Greater than, then tell me. Tell me what he did. For the first time, the stranger almost smiled, a thin, joyless thing. Greater than, he bargained. He always bargained, but you cannot outbid a god. The river's secrets. By midsummer, the river no longer flowed like a river. It swelled and writhed, thick with algae and foam, the current whispering strange, guttural words when the wind died down. Livestock refused to drink from it, children fainted if they wandered too close to its banks. One night, when the moon was nothing but a shadow, an old fisherman named Eli Carter swore he saw faces in the water, dozens of them, staring up from the depths, mouths open in a soundless scream. When the town searched for Eli the next morning, they found only his boots by the waterline, still warm. The meeting in the church. The town gathered inside the church, fear heavy in the air. Rebecca stood at the front, the ledger open on the pulpit. Greater than, we've been living on borrowed time, she said. Silas opened a door he never meant to close. And now, whatever's on the other side is coming through. A man in the back shouted, then close it. Seal it up. The stranger's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. Greater than, you cannot close what was never built for you. The bell is the key. As long as it tolls, the way will remain open. Ruthie's vision. Ruthie, pale and trembling, stood up from the second pew. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it silenced the entire room. Greater than, he doesn't want the town, she said. He wants the roots. He wants what's underneath. Rebecca turned, dread pooling in her chest. Greater than, underneath what, Ruthie? The girl blinked, eyes glazed and distant. Greater than, underneath us. The foundations. He's been feeding the ground, and now the ground is ready to feed him back. The third toll. The third toll came just as the meeting broke apart, louder and deeper than before. The entire building shuddered, wood groaning under the weight of the sound. Outside, the air tasted like copper, sharp and metallic, and the river glowed faintly with a sickly green light. Then came the screams. From the edge of town, where the houses leaned closest to the banks, voices rose, high, panicked, and then suddenly cut off, one by one, as though swallowed whole. The empty houses. By morning, 3 houses stood empty. No sign of struggle, no blood, just silence and the faint scent of brine lingering in the air. Rebecca, lantern shaking in her hand, opened the door to the Simmons home. The table was still set for dinner. A pipe sat cooling by the fireplace. And carved into the wood of the kitchen wall, deep enough to splinter the boards, were 3 words. Greater than, do not run. The archivist. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No one saw who delivered it. The envelope was damp, the ink smudged but legible. Rebecca unfolded it slowly, her breath catching as she read. Greater than, I was the archivist once, long before the copper bell rang. I have seen what lies beneath the river, and it is not a god but a wound. It is growing. When the 4th toll comes, the door will open, and the river will no longer be water. You must choose now, surrender the town, or drown with it. At the bottom was a name, scratched in hurried script. A. Weatherby. The gathering storm. That night, the wind rose, carrying the scent of decay and rain. Rebecca stood by the water, clutching the ledger, the letter, and a single, sharp thought pounding in her head. Greater than this is no longer about survival. This is about ending it. Behind her, the stranger's voice carried through the rising storm. Greater than, the bell doesn't ring by chance. Someone here calls to him. Someone who still believes. Rebecca turned, lightning flashing across the dark horizon, and said the words that would change everything. Greater than, then we find them. And we make them stop. Closing line. And as thunder rolled over the river and the bell began to hum again, low, eager, and endless, the town of Fort Worth braced for the reckoning that would come with the fourth toll. Would you like part 9 to focus on the hunt for the one calling the bell, or should we follow the stranger's perspective to reveal what truly lies beneath the river? Part 9: The Fourth Toll. Hook. By the time the fourth toll echoed across Fort Worth, the town had already begun to rot. The river rose like a swollen vein, and the earth beneath the copper bell shivered as if it could barely contain what clawed inside it. The night before, Rebecca didn't sleep. She sat by the cracked window of her boarding room, the ledger open on her lap, trying to make sense of the impossible. Every page was a warning and a map, scrawled in Silas Weatherby's sharp, unforgiving hand. Greater than, when the fourth toll comes, the path will be clear. The soil will weep, and the living will not know their own names. She read the line again and again, as if repetition could twist its meaning into something less damning. But the air outside was heavy, thick with that now familiar scent of copper and rot, and she knew there was no escaping what was coming. The stranger's warning. Near dawn, the stranger appeared again, as if called by her fear. His coat was slick with morning dew, his pale eyes fixed on her through the half-open door. Greater than, it's tonight, he said. The fourth toll. You can feel it, can't you? The hum beneath your feet. Rebecca clutched the ledger, her knuckles white. Greater than, tell me how to stop it. The stranger tilted his head slightly, the faintest trace of pity in his voice. Greater than, you don't stop it. You endure it, or you drown trying. The search. By noon, the town gathered in the square. Every able body, every trembling hand clutching lanterns, rifles, crosses, anything that might keep the darkness at bay. Rebecca stood at the center, her voice hard and clear. Greater than, someone here is calling the bell, she said. We find them, or none of us see the dawn. Silence followed. Then Ruthie, pale, trembling Ruthie, stepped forward. Her voice was a whisper but sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. Greater than, it's not one person, she said. It's all of us. Every time we whisper his name, every time we listen when the river hums, every time we believe, we're feeding it. The fourth toll. The bell rang just after sundown. Not once, not twice, but a long, guttural toll that rolled across the water like thunder. The ground heaved. Lanterns flickered. Rebecca stumbled into the street, clutching the ledger as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. From the river came the sound of rushing water, and then screams, dozens of them, echoing from the houses closest to the banks. The river awakens. The river was no longer a river. It boiled and twisted, glowing faintly with that sickly green light, rising higher and higher until it lapped at the steps of the copper bell. Shapes moved beneath the surface, pale, twisted things with too many eyes and mouths that never stopped moving. Greater than, it's opening, the stranger said, his voice flat, almost resigned. The door's wide now. Whatever's on the other side, it's here. The first taken. Eli Carter's widow was the first to go. She had been standing by her porch, clutching a Bible to her chest, when the water surged up the street, wrapping around her legs like living rope. Rebecca screamed her name, but it was too late. With a violent jerk, the river yanked her backward, dragging her screaming into the glowing current. And then she was gone. The copper bell. The bell rang again, sharp and mocking, from the tower above the saloon. Rebecca's gaze snapped upward. The bell was glowing now, faint and pulsing, the sound vibrating in her bones. She turned to the stranger, her voice raw with fury. Greater than, who's ringing it? He shook his head slowly. Greater than, no one. It rings itself now. It doesn't need us anymore. The revelation. In the chaos, Ruthie collapsed to her knees, her small hands clutching at her head. Greater than, it's underneath, she sobbed. Under the saloon. He's been sleeping there the whole time. That's why the bell, that's why it sings. Rebecca froze. Under the copper bell. The foundation they'd built the town on, brick by cursed brick. The descent. By midnight, the survivors, fewer now, trembling and soaked, gathered at the saloon doors. Rebecca led them, the stranger a shadow at her side, the ledger clutched tight against her chest. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of iron and rot. The humming from below was deafening now, vibrating through the floorboards like the pulse of something ancient and alive. The stranger lit a lantern, his voice calm but sharp. Greater than, if we go down there, we don't come back the same. If we come back at all. Rebecca met his pale gaze, her jaw set. Greater than, then we go down. Tonight, we finish this. The stairs below. The trapdoor behind the bar creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into blackness. The walls were damp, the wood slick with something that smelled like brine and rot. Every step felt heavier than the last, the air colder, the hum louder, until it wasn't a hum at all but a voice, whispering in a language that made their ears ring and their stomachs turn. Greater than, come closer. Come closer. I've been waiting. The chamber. The stairs ended in a wide, cavernous chamber beneath the saloon. The river cut through the earth here, glowing faintly, pulsing like a vein. And in the center, rising from the muck and stone, was the bell, massive and rusted, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to twist and writhe under the lantern light. Rebecca stepped forward, the ledger trembling in her hands. Greater than, this is it, she whispered. This is where it began. The stranger's voice was low, almost reverent. Greater than, and where it ends. The final choice. The humming grew louder, the words clearer now, wrapping around Rebecca's mind like chains. Greater than, one life. One name. The door closes if you give me one of you. She turned slowly, the weight of the words settling like lead in her chest. Around her, the survivors stared in silent horror, the lantern's glow flickering against their pale, terrified faces. Closing line, and as the fourth toll faded into the heavy, suffocating silence of the chamber, Rebecca realized the truth, the bell wasn't asking for a name. It was choosing one. Would you like part 10, the final part, to be written with a tragic ending, a twist ending, or a slim chance of survival? Part 10 The Final Toll. Hook. The silence in the chamber was alive, as though the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for the bell to decide whose life would seal the door. Forever. The chosen. Rebecca's pulse thundered in her ears. The bell hummed louder now, vibrating the air, the floor, her very bones. One by one, every survivor dropped to their knees, not in prayer, but in surrender, their faces pale, mouths moving soundlessly as though repeating some private prayer to a god that had long since abandoned them. The stranger did not kneel. He stood still, unblinking, as the hum shifted into words. Greater than, Rebecca. The name slithered across the chamber, ancient and absolute. Her breath hitched. The ledger slipped from her hands, pages fluttering like frantic birds until they landed in the wet, black muck by the river's edge. Greater than, no, she whispered. No, not me, not. The stranger's pale eyes fixed on her, unreadable. Greater than, it's not a request, he said, voice flat. It's always been you. The bargain. The survivors began to murmur. Some begged her to accept. Others cursed her name, their voices sharp with panic and grief. Ruthie crawled forward on her knees, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. Greater than, please, she whispered, clutching Rebecca's trembling hands. Please, if it takes you, maybe it stops. Maybe we live. Rebecca stared into the girl's wide, desperate eyes and, for the briefest moment, wished she could hate her. But she couldn't. Not when the bell called louder now, thrumming through her like a second heartbeat. Greater than, one life. One name. Close the door. The stranger's truth. The stranger stepped closer, his shadow stretching long in the lantern's sickly glow. Greater than, there's no mercy in it, he said quietly. It won't stop with you. But it will, sleep. For a while. Rebecca's voice cracked. Greater than, then why me? Why my name? For the first time since she'd met him, the stranger smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his lips. Greater than, because you stayed. You listened. And now, you belong to it. The sacrifice. The floor trembled. The river surged, glowing brighter, hissing like it could taste her fear. Rebecca wiped her tears with shaking hands, then turned to the others, those broken faces she'd fought so hard to protect, and forced herself to stand. "Greater than, if it takes me," she said, her voice sharp and steady, "you seal this place. You burn the bell. You never, ever let anyone dig here again." Ruthie shook her head violently, sobbing, but Rebecca only smiled, soft and sad. Then she turned toward the glowing river. Dash dash dash. The stranger didn't try to stop her. He only watched as she stepped forward, her boots sinking into the wet, cold mud, the hum of the bell rising to a fever pitch. Rebecca closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. "Greater than, if you want me, take me. But let them live." Dash dash dash. The final toll. The bell screamed. Not a chime, not a hum, a scream so sharp and violent it shattered the lantern glass, plunging the chamber into pulsing green light. The river rose like a living thing, wrapping around Rebecca, pulling her down, swallowing her whole as the survivors screamed her name. And then, silence. Dash dash dash. The aftermath. When the survivors stumbled out of the copper bell, the sky above Fort Worth was still and quiet. The river was calm again, dark and unremarkable, as though nothing unnatural had ever churned within its depths. But the bell was gone. No ruins, no shards of rusted iron, just an empty, hollow space in the tower, as if it had never been there at all. Dash dash dash. The stranger's departure. By morning, the stranger was gone, too. No note, no trail. Only the lingering scent of smoke and rain where he had stood, and the faint impression of boot prints leading to the edge of the river, and stopping there. Dash dash dash. The town that remains. Weeks turned to months. The town rebuilt itself in silence, boards nailed over. Broken windows, streets swept clean of ash and debris. No one spoke of that night, not openly. But in the quiet hours, whispers clung to the air like dust. Whispers about a woman who had walked into the river and never returned. Whispers about how, sometimes, if you stand by the water at midnight, you can hear the faint sound of a bell, a low, mournful toll rolling through the fog. Dash dash dash. Ruthie's diary. Years later, long after the town had faded from maps and memory, Ruthie would write in her diary. "Greater than, Rebecca didn't die. Not really. The river kept her. The bell kept her. And if the toll comes again, she'll be the one to open the door. Or close it. God help us if she forgets which side she's on." Dash dash dash. The last sound. And on the anniversary of the fourth toll, when the moon hung low and swollen over the silent ruins of Fort Worth, the survivors, older now, scattered but restless, would swear they heard it. Just once. A single, distant toll. Low, hollow, hungry. Dash dash dash. Closing line. And beneath the still waters of the Copper Bell River, where the light never reaches, something smiled. Dash dash dash. Call to action. If you loved this dark, historic horror tale of the Copper Bell, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories. Share this series with friends who love horror and history. Comment below, what do you think truly lives beneath the Copper Bell?